Alright, so the Celtics are the best team in the East, but it's no surprise. They have a great young core composed of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, so it got me thinking, how did they manage to draft two future Hall of Famers in only 2 years? And that's when I remembered. July of 2007. After 2 years of not making the playoffs, the Boston Celtics knew that they had to make changes to go back to their winning days. And in July of 2007, they did just that. They signed Kevin Garnett.
This has probably been the hardest 72 hours I've dealt with since I've been in the NBA.
Arguably the best power forward at the time, and a player that averaged 20 points per game in the prior season. He would instantly not only make them a playoffs team, but also a championship contender. Later that season, after finishing the season with a record of 66 wins and 16 losses, they could not have been more confident going into the playoffs, and they started by beating the Hawks. Then the Cavs, and finally the Pistons.
What a great victory for the Celtics. They win the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games.
But they were up to the biggest challenge yet, having to play the finals against the Lakers and Kobe Bryant.
Allen on the drive, gets to the basket, lefty layup, banks it in.
They had finally won a championship after 22 long years, and they were on top of the NBA, and no one could stop them. But then what happened next? 5 years later, 2013. After 5 years, the Celtics did manage to make the finals in 2010, but they didn't win it, and ever since then, they never made the finals again, which puts us in 2013, where one of the biggest trades in NBA history took place. The Celtics traded their 2 stars, Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, for 3 first-round picks and a pick swap. And it's safe to say people had mixed opinions.
Cents in the dollar. There's no guarantee that any of those picks will get in the lottery. Look at what just happened with Oklahoma City. They thought they were getting this choice lottery pick. It ended up being number 12. And they're gutting the team.
And even though he's not the Kevin Garnett of 4 or 5 years ago, neither is Paul Pierce. Both of those guys on the downside of their careers. But Paul Pierce is a money player. He's a guy that's a pro. He's going to come in immediately and give you a go-to type guy in certain situations.
And with the Nets, Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett had good seasons, but they never got past their Eastern Conference Finals. So while the Nets would go on to ruin their future by trading the valuable picks they had, the Celtics had other plans. 2016, where it all starts. After never getting past the first round in the years after the trade happened, in 2016 the Celtics ended up with the 3rd overall pick in the draft that ended up being Jaylen Brown. They were the #1 seed that year, but still couldn't make the finals after losing the Eastern Conference Finals. But the season after that is where everything really starts to take place. After many years of disappointing seasons, they had to really take things to the next level, and they did by making one of the biggest signings in that offseason.
Hey. Hey.
The Boston Celtics won this trade just the way they're going to win the Eastern Conference next year. And yes, I put a case of do on that right here, right now.
They signed Kyrie when he was just coming off a title with the Cavs in 2016. Oh, and they also drafted their soon-to-be franchise player, Jason Tatum. So it's pretty safe to say that they were focusing on one thing and one thing only, their long-awaited championship. The team was stacked, and they made it to the playoffs. They started by beating the Bucks in 7, then demolished the 76ers in 5, and were closer than ever to making it to the finals. But they weren't just going against any team. They were going against the Cavs, and most importantly, LeBron. Even after putting up a great fight, they still couldn't beat him and were left with almost going to the finals that season. And this is where we take a big jump from that game to 5 years later. 5 years later, because they hadn't done much in that 5-year period. After they lost that game, the closest they have gotten since then was in 2020 when they lost to the Heat, which was very disappointing because Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were stars. But regardless, they still were growing as players and averaged 20 points per game in their career, which was incredible because they had so much potential ahead of them. Which takes us to now, 2022. Now this is where the story gets interesting, because now they are suddenly the strongest team in the East, and the way they did it was never done before. They were 3 games under 500 before the All-Star break, and they were the 10th seed in the Eastern Conference at 23 wins and 24 losses. But they had a best second half in the league, which meant they were going to the playoffs with a lot of momentum, and it did help them because they had one of the most impressive runs I've ever seen. They first started by sweeping the Brooklyn Nets, which were believed to be the championship contenders at first. Then they beat the former champions in 7 games. And then they got one of the hardest matchups against the Heat, and they won in 7 games. In the finals, they were going against no other than the biggest dynasty of the decade, the Golden State Warriors. And although they did end up losing in 6 games, the reason I'm doing this video is because there is something even scarier about this team. This is just the start. I mean, think about it. This is only the first final they have made with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And I will say this right now. This could be one of the biggest dynasties to come, and it could start next season. And as the Celtics got stronger and stronger, the Nets, well, they're a different story. But if you want to know how they turned to a disaster, just click that video right there.